First published completely in 1982, Stephen King introduced us to Roland Deschain and his eternal quest for the Dark Tower. Now we venture a few years into the future with 1986's The Drawing of the Three, where we continue on Roland's journey and where the real Dark Tower begins. Buckle up. Roland wakes up from a confused dream of himself drowning 7 hours after his palaver with the man in black. He was awoken by the cold ocean waves creeping up his legs and body, causing him to panic about his guns and shells getting wet. The gun can be disassembled and cleaned, but wet shells, like wet matches, may never ever be usable again. He begins to hear senseless, chitinous wording, like something trying to communicate. In the close distance, he sees an awful lobster abomination, about 4 feet long and a foot high, that he dubs a lostrosity. It's pulling itself along the sand with its great claws towards him. Another grinding roar, this one much louder. The creature immediately stopped and raised its claws in its own peculiar version of the honor stance. This wave was bigger. Roland began to drag himself up the slope of the strand again, and when he put out his hands, the clawed creature moved with a speed of which its previous movements had not even hinted. The gunslinger felt a bright flare of pain in his right hand, but there was no time to think about that now. He pushed with the heels of his soggy boots, clawed with his hands, and managed to get away from the wave. Roland saw the stumps of his first and second fingers of his right hand disappearing into the creature's jagged beak. It lunged again, and Roland, lifting his dripping right hand just in time to save his remaining 2 fingers. I see serious problems ahead, the gunslinger thought remotely. The lobstrosity moved faster than the gunslinger realized it could and snipped off the middle and index fingers on his right hand. He tried to draw his gun, but with his 2 most important shooting fingers gone, his gun falls to the sand. He starts to kick at the creature, who parries the kick and snips off the tip of Roland's right boot and much of the big toe on that foot. He manages to get a hold of a big rock and brain the creature, and he stops it for good with his good boot until he sees his removed fingers digesting in the creature's stomach. The gunslinger begins to assess his situation and realizes he's kinda fucked. He's half a hand down and taking poison damage from the lobstrosity. At least he jerks off left-handed, he thinks. The gunslinger's veins are going red and black from his wounds. He's growing weak and feverish, stumbling his way along the beach until he can only crawl to locomote himself. The sand rips open the scabs trying to form on his stumps when he sees, about a quarter-mile up the shore, something standing. He uses all his will to keep crawling as the infection takes hold. He gets closer and sees a door that appears to be made of ironwood, hovering half a foot off the ground. It has hinges, but no frame. The hinges are attached to nothing. Inscribed on the door is the face of the baboon and 2 words: the prisoner. On his hands and knees he raised his head like a groggy fighter, and some distance ahead, perhaps a mile, perhaps 3, it was difficult to judge distances along the unchanging reach of the strand with the fever working inside him, making his eyeballs pulse in and out. He saw something new, something which stood upright on the beach. What was it? It didn't matter. He studies it, trying to garner as much information as he can. From the sides, it almost vanishes, and from behind, there's nothing there. But dead on from the front, it exists. He takes the warm gold knob in his hand and pulls it open to be greeted with a view of the open sky, the sky as high as an eagle might view it, maybe higher cloud shadows on the ground below. He does a little shriek and slams the door shut. But was that all he saw? He hears Court in his mind telling him to reassess the situation. It wasn't just sky. There was a frame around it. He decides to take another peek. This time he could see words, words he could almost understand, like the letters of the high speech and twisted around and mixed up. Above the words was a picture of a horseless vehicle. It reminded him of what Jake told him when hypnotized in the way station. The picture and words descend, and the picture through the door shows an aisle with rows of seats on each side, and men filling those seats with strange cravats and completely unarmed. No guns, not even a knife. A woman begins down the aisle to the door, and she wore a kind of red uniform that reminded Roland of military. But never in his days had he seen a woman in a uniform that included pants. The woman asks if he would like anything. Food or drink, he thinks, but a voice answers, gin. He understood then he wasn't seeing through a door. He was looking through someone else's eyes. The eyes of the prisoner. Roland continues to watch through the eyes. It's dizzying to see. The view goes from a glass cup of gin that looked like glass but wasn't, The view turned sickeningly down the aisle to a steel door with a glowing word above it. Vacant. Inside is the strangest privy Roland had ever seen. It was all metal. He can see wisps of curly black hair, long fingers with a cheap ring, and the hint of a blue shirt. In the mirror, he sees a face he's seen once before, on the tarot card drawn by the man in black. The same dark, sallow eyes, the same spill of dark hair. He could see the pain of the baboon in his face. He's shaking. Roland can feel that the prisoner is sick. He thinks of Nort, and he thinks of the Oracle. The name of the demon is heroin. Heroin equals something like devil's grass, he fixates. The prisoner is like a weed eater, an addict. The perspective switches to inside the prisoner's thinking, and it's fun, quick, snappy time. Eddie ordered a gin and tonic. Maybe not such a good idea to be going to New York Customs drunk, and he knew that once he got started, he would keep on going. But he had to have something. When you gotta get down and you can't find the elevator, Henry had told him once, you gotta do it any way you can, even if it's only with a shovel. Then, after he'd given his order and the stewardess had left, he started to feel like he was maybe going to vomit. Not for sure going to vomit, only maybe, but it was better to be safe. Going through customs with a pound of pure cocaine under each armpit with gin on your breath was not so good. Going through customs that way with puke drying on your pants would be a disaster. So, better to be safe. The feeling would probably pass. It usually did, but better to be safe. Trouble was, he was going cool turkey, not cold. More words of wisdom from that great sage and eminent junkie, Henry Dean. They'd been sitting on the penthouse balcony of the Regency Tower, not quite on the nod, but edging towards it. The sun warm on their faces, done up so good back in the good old days when Eddie had just started to snort the stuff Henry himself had yet to pick up his first needle. Everybody talks about going cold turkey, Henry had said, but before you get there, you gotta go cool turkey. And Eddie, stoned out of his mind, had cackled madly because he knew exactly what Henry was talking about. Henry, however, had not so much cracked a smile. In some ways, cool turkey is worse than cold turkey, Henry said. At least when you make it to cold turkey, you know you're gonna puke, you know you're gonna shake, you know you're gonna sweat until it feels like you're drowning in it. Cool turkey is like the curse of expectation. It goes on like this for 3 pages. You're going to hear the great sage and eminent junkie Henry Dean a lot. He's the most important person in the prisoner's life. Back in the seat, Roland manages to speak through the prisoner's mouth. He tells the attendant that he is starving and would take anything, even a popkin. She doesn't know what that is, so he searches into the prisoner's mind and finds the word he's looking for. A sandwich. She can give him tuna fish. The gunslinger has never heard of tutor fish, but beggars can't be choosers. Roland retreats back into the prisoner's mind for now. He's confused, and he's getting scared. He's nodded off before, but Jesus Christ, he's never blanked out like that before. He's carrying 2 pounds of cocaine strapped, concealed, and taped under his armpits for the man Balazar. So he's a little on edge already, and right now his right hand is starting to throb and hurt. Henry and Eddie's relationship is a fucked up one of addiction, personal dependence, and pity. The gunslinger can tell now the prisoner has fallen asleep, and he watches a depressing memory of the prisoner play out. The trouble with him and Henry is that they were like Charlie Brown and Lucy. The only difference was once in a while, Henry would hold onto the football so Eddie could kick it. Not often, but once in a while. Eddie had even thought while in one of his heroin dazes that he ought to write Charles Schultz a letter. Dear Mr. Schultz, he would say, you're missing a bet by always having Lucy pull the football up at the last second. She ought to hold it down there once in a while, nothing Charlie Brown could ever predict. You understand? Sometimes she'd maybe hold it down for him to kick 3, even 4 times in a row. Then nothing for a month. Then once. And then nothing for 3 or 4 days. And then, you get the idea. That would really fuck up the kid, wouldn't it? Eddie knew it would really fuck the kid up. From experience, he knew it. Henry is a sallow skeleton of a man deep in his heroin addiction. We now cut to the perspective of Jane the flight attendant. She's annoyed that a young man, although he was kind of cute in his faded blue jeans and paisley shirt, had fallen asleep on her after pleading how hungry he was. He's probably going to fall asleep again and not even eat it, she thinks. And what did he say? Thanky sigh? She went down to the galley for a smoke and realized she only thought he was cute because of his hazel eyes. But they weren't hazel. When the man in 3A had thanked her, they were bright blue, like the underside of an iceberg. The match burned her finger and snapped her out of it. Lots of people wear contacts. That's not so weird. People can be vain, but she has an itch of worry. He talked funny. Thanky sigh? Was that sleep talk or slip into some foreign language? All her training tells her not to instigate, but to always be vigilant. He could be a terrorist. She decides to keep a close eye on him. The gunslinger needs to eat, and he needs medicine. He manages to slip into the pilot seat of the prisoner's body and takes the Tudorfish popkin in his hands. He focuses on it hard until it vanishes from the prisoner's hands into his own. The half that forms in his right hand falls into the sand. He eats it in 3 bites. No one on the plane saw the sandwich vanish from thin air, but Jane noticed it was gone, like he just fucking swallowed it, and the man in 3A was already asleep again. They'll be landing at Kennedy International soon, the co-pilot says over the intercom. Eddie goes to the bathroom again. He didn't know if he was going to be okay, no matter what the American man who secured the drugs to him said. He smiled at the stewardess as he passed. She smiled back. He snorts the little paper of powder he had for an emergency like this to steel his nerves. He had the sniffles to prove he took it, but the steel wire feeling in his gut made him unable to feel the effects. He goes back to his seat. His eyes were hazel again, and Jane was struggling to rationalize that the too pale man just took out his contacts. Again. She had a bad, jittery feeling in her gut. She fills a thermos full of hot coffee and barely puts the lid on it. She would risk the blisters if it was a hard landing. There's a great tense moment here. This is it, Jane thought. This is where he brings out the grenade or an automatic weapon or whatever the hell he's got. And the moment she saw it, the very moment she was going to flip the red top off the thermos in her slightly trembling hands, and there was going to be one very surprised friend of Allah rolling around on the aisle floor of Delta Flight 901 while his skin boiled on his face. 3A unzipped the bag. Jane got ready. The gunslinger knows the prisoner took a drug, not one that would cure his poison. The gunslinger also notices the steward noticing the prisoner and that she may make it difficult for the prisoner to pass through the ritual of the clearing of the customs. If the prisoner cannot clear the customs, the gunslinger cannot get a drug for his poison, and he would die. The prisoner must clear the customs. He pulled the sandwich through, then by God he must pull the parcels of drugs in the prisoner's armpits through so the customs may be cleared. He proved he can bring things through, but he worries if he's able to bring them back. He draws a coin from the prisoner's pocket and tries to replace it with a seashell. It doesn't work. The coin makes it to Roland, but the shell does not get to the prisoner. At least he could clear the customs. The stewardess Jane felt silly thinking the man in 3A was carrying a weapon and was going to hijack the plane. She tells a more senior stewardess her false concern and is stunned that she was also watching the man in 3A and that there's enough under his armpits to stock a drugstore. They shouldn't worry. They'll tell the captain will tell customs, and that'll be that. She did the right thing by worrying. Time was getting short, and the gunslinger was getting annoyed with the prisoner. He still doesn't see anything. Roland could see everything the stewardess had thought and felt on her face to the weapon with the unscrewed lid she held to her breast as the shaky sky carriage cruised down the concrete tarmac. She was going to the small door where the drivers of the sky carriage were separated from the rest. There was no time. He had to make contact with Eddie Dean. Eddie got his passport tucked away as the steel wire gut twisted and tightened, when suddenly a voice spoke in his head. Not a thought, a voice that didn't belong to him or his brother Henry. Listen to me, fellow. Listen carefully, and if you would remain safe, let your face show nothing which might further arouse the suspicions of those army women. God knows they're suspicious enough already. It doesn't take much convincing for Eddie to believe the voice is real. The gunslinger warns him that the women in uniform know that he's carrying, that they told the drivers, and that the drivers are going to tell the priest that performed the ritual of clearing. He tells him to move his ass back to the privy and fast, while other passengers are grabbing their belongings from the overhead bins and lining up in the aisles to exit. Some tried to escort Eddie off out the door of the jetway, and he quickly tucked into the privy, gagging and feigning that he's about to vomit. There's a safe place he can put his parcels and clear the custom. God, oh Christ, I imagine it all. Oh Jesus, how crazy could I have been? Get ready, a grim voice said. I can't do it alone. I can come forward, but I can't make you come through. You have to do it with me. Turn around. Eddie was suddenly seeing through 2 pairs of eyes, feeling with 2 sets of nerves, but not all the nerves of this other person were here. Parts of the other were gone, freshly gone, screaming with pain. Sensing with 10 senses, thinking with 2 brains, his blood beating with 2 hearts. He turned around. There was a hole in the side of the bathroom, a hole that looked like a doorway. Through it, he could see a gray, grainy beach, and waves the color of old athletic socks breaking upon it. He could hear the waves. He could smell the salt. a smell as bitter as tears in his nose. He needs to go through the doorway. People are pounding on the door and demanding that Eddie deplane. Roland commands him to step through the doorway, and Eddie falls into another world. Eddie is trying to fathom what he's seeing. A tall man, pale from sickness, nearing the color of gravestone. Roland is yelling in front of him to get rid of the drugs, and the people behind him, on the other side of the magic doorway and plane door, are yelling for him to come out. He sees truth in Roland's blue eyes and complies. He can see in the bathroom mirror through the doorway. He sees himself, the doorway, the beach, and the gunslinger. They begin fumbling to remove the cocaine and tape that took an American man 20 minutes to secure to Eddie's body. We cut to the commotion outside the bathroom door. The pilots are trying to formulate how to go about the man in 3A who locked himself in the bathroom and has gone silent. They can't hear him trying to flush his payload down the sink or the toilet. They shut off the water already, but there would still be some noise. They send for the customs enforcement officers and decide to take action. When the last passenger in line is off the plane, they're busting down the lavatory door. Roland commands Eddie to get the knife from his purse. The last passenger, an old woman, exits the plane after a small exchange with the stewardess, and the customs agents arrive. The old woman yelling at the stewardess made Eddie slip and cut himself a little bit, but there was no time to worry about that now. Eddie manages to cut all the tape free on his front. He could feel the fever heat radiate from Roland, while Roland uses his good hand to yank off the rest that's applied to his back. After frantically trying to get his shirt in the right orientation and buttoned, the door to the privy shuddered inwards as the pilots banged on it with the heel of their hands. Next one, they'll break it down. Eddie had an idea and began unbuckling his pants. The pilot throws his shoulder into the lavatory door one last time as it gives way, and he's met with the sight of the man in 3A, pants around his ankles, covering himself in surprise. They demand to know why he didn't answer. Eddie sticks out his arm from the toilet, and he can't reach the door. He's dragged off the plane by the pilot and dragged to customs by the enforcement agents. Eddie kept telling them to take it easy, mellow out, he could walk just fine. But he thought later the tips of his shoes only touched the floor of the jetway 3 or 4 times between the 727's hatch and the exit to the terminal, where 3 more customs officers and half a dozen airport security cops stood. The customs guys waited for Eddie, the cops holding back a small crowd that stared at him with uneasy, avid interest as he was led away. Eddie was sitting in a chair. The chair was in a small white room. It was the only chair in the small white room. The small white room was crowded. The small white room was smoky. Eddie was in his underpants. Eddie wanted a cigarette, and the other 6, no, 7 men in the small white room were dressed. The other men were standing around him, enclosing him. 3, no, 4 of them were smoking cigarettes. Eddie wanted to jitter and jive. Eddie wanted to hop and bop. Eddie sat still, relaxed, looking at the men around him with amused interest, as if he wasn't going crazy for a fix, as if he wasn't going crazy from simple claustrophobia. The other in his mind was the reason why. He had been terrified of the other at first. Now he thanked God the other was there. The other might be sick, dying even, but there was enough steel left in his spine for him to have some left alone to the scared 21-year-old junkie. They questioned Eddie about the funny red marks on his body. An allergy, he claims. They're suspicious mosquito bites all over Eddie's inner elbow. The smuggling job wasn't planned overnight. Eddie stopped arm pumping a month ago. Henry couldn't have done that. It had to be Eddie. When he absolutely needed a fix and couldn't resist any longer, he would shoot up real high on his left thigh, right where his testicles lay when he's relaxed. They're not buying his excuses. If he's really clean, why not do a drug test? Eddie started getting white hot angry and started listening to the voice inside that always agreed with him and gave them the permission he needs when he needs approval, like when his brother gave him a sincere attaboy. Okay, the voice responded at once, and Eddie felt more than agreement. He felt the kind of go-to-the-wall approval. It made him feel the way he felt when Henry hugged him, tousled his hair, or punched him on the shoulder and said, "You done good, kid. Don't let it go to your head, but you done good." If they're going to give him a test without a court order, then they better get enough equipment to test everyone in the room. A federal marshal and names and IDs on each and every vial, though, and those results handed over to his lawyer. This pisses off the agent searching him. A ragged little pissant like him couldn't have a lawyer. And he didn't, Eddie confesses. But this whole exchange convinced him to get one. The silence is thick and difficult. The older agent, who looked like he was in charge, asked Eddie to remove his pants again. "You guys have emptied the crap tank on that plane already. God, you've had enough time to have been through it 3 times.
You've been through my stuff. I bent over and let one of you stick the world's longest finger up my ass. If a prostate check is an exam, that was a motherfucking safari. I was scared to look down. I thought I'd see that guy's fingernails sticking out of my cock.
They let him go begrudgingly. The man Balazar had a limo waiting for Eddie, but when he didn't show in 15 minutes, the driver had his orders to split. 2 hours he was in that little room. He was in a cab, and the driver asked if they're being tailed because Eddie kept checking behind him out the rear window. He didn't actually think about trails. He had spotted them already when they got on the road. Eddie turned the cabbie down to a background drone, listening just enough so he could nod in the right places. When you thought about it, the cabbie's rap was actually quite amusing. One of the tails was a dark blue sedan. Eddie guessed that the one belonged to Customs. The other was a panel truck with Janelli's Pizza written on the sides. There was also a picture of a pizza, only the pizza was a smiling boy's face, and the smiling boy was smacking his lips, and written under the picture was the slogan, it's a good pizza. Only some young urban artist with a spray can and rudimentary sense of humor had drawn a line through pizza and had printed the word pussy above it. In reality, Eddie kept checking behind him because he's fascinated by the door. When being dragged off the plane and in the small interrogation room, the door was there. He could see these awful spider lobster creature things through it, 3 feet behind him. It blinked out twice when the gunslinger went through without him, leaving Eddie feeling like a child with a burned out nightlight. Eddie thinks back in the interrogation room and through the door when Roland blinked back the first time. The cab drops Eddie at his building, and Roland is astonished to see the highest buildings he's ever laid eyes on. And so many of them. They live like ants, Eddie remarks. The blue sedan cruised past, and the pizza truck turned in and approached him. Eddie could feel Roland's preparedness. He sensed that he was readier to move in his sleep than Eddie could ever be in his most awake state. The pizza truck rolled in and the window rolled down. Eddie wondered whether he'd see a face or a gun. The second time Roland blinked out was just after Eddie was let go. He knew Roland needed food and water, and he needed medicine bad. Eddie couldn't get the heavy-duty stuff Roland needed yet, but maybe some aspirin could help with the hot, radiating fever he was suffering. The gunslinger had eaten, but not eaten enough. He needed a drink. Most of all, he needed medicine. Eddie went to the newsstand and bought a tin of extra-strength Anacin. He went over to the snack bar and bought a couple of foot-long dogs and an extra-large Pepsi. He got a tin of heavy-duty Anacin. Henry called the footlongs Godzilla dogs. He wasn't sure if Roland even ate meat, or if this stuff might kill him. Roland assures him he can pull them through to his world. Eddie's doubtful because he was asleep the first time Roland did this trick. They gotta be careful, because Eddie spotted 2 guys tracking them through the concourse. There are 5, Roland corrected him. He took the Anacin out of the stapled bag he had stuffed in his pocket, almost put it down on one of the hot dogs, and suddenly realized that Roland would have problems just getting what Eddie thought of as the poison proofing off the tin, let alone opening it. He did it himself, shook 3 pills onto one of the napkins, debated, then added 3 more. 3 now, 3 later, he said. If there is a later. All right, thank you. Now what? Eddie had glanced into the convex mirror. 2 of the agents were strolling casually towards the snack bar, maybe not liking the way Eddie's back was turned, maybe smelling a little prestidigitation in the process and wanted a closer look. If something was going to happen, it better happen quick. He put his hands around everything, feeling the heat of the dogs and their soft white rolls, and the chill of the Pepsi. In that moment, he looked like a guy getting ready to carry a snack back to his kids, and then the stuff started to melt. He stared down, eyes widening until it felt to him that they must soon fall out and dangle by their stalks. He could see the hot dogs through the rolls. He could see the Pepsi through the cup, the ice-choked liquid curving to conform to a shape which could no longer be seen. Then he could see the red Formica counter through the foot-long dogs and the white wall through the Pepsi. His hands slid toward each other, the resistance between them growing less and less, and then they closed against each other, palm to palm. The food, the napkins, the Pepsi Cola, the 6 Anacin, all the things which had been between his hands were gone. The doorway blinked out again. When Roland steps through the door and into Eddie's head, his body lays there in the sand, limp and vulnerable. He left to move himself before the lobstrosities could find and eat him. The poisoning sapped his strength and was killing him. He couldn't walk. He had to crawl. The poison sapped his strength and was killing him. He couldn't even walk. He had to crawl to safety with his goods. He wanted to leave the glue string and sacks of drugs behind, let the lobstrosities have them and scatter them to the wind. But Eddie might need them, so the man Balazar doesn't kill him, and in turn, kill Roland. He crawled about 20 yards, enough to have some distance and safety, he thought. He was astonished to see the door, not way down on the beach, but 3 feet behind him. He understood that when this door closes, it's going to close forever. Eddie needs to be on this side with him when it does. The man in black laughs inside of Roland's skull. A paragon of virtue you are, gunslinger, the man in black laughed. He seemed to have taken up permanent residence inside Roland's head. You have killed the boy. That was the sacrifice that enabled you to catch me, and I suppose to create the door between worlds. Now you intend to draw your three, one by one, and condemn all of them to something you not have for yourself. A lifetime in an alien world, where they may die as easily as animals in a zoo set free in a wild place. The tower, Roland thought wildly. Once I've gotten to the tower and done whatever it is I'm supposed to do there, accomplished whatever fundamental act of restoration or redemption for which I was meant, he quiets the voice and rests for just a second before going through the door again. The second time he returned to his body, it was night, and his body was stiff as to be comatose. He manages to will himself up and feel the slight warmth of the dogs. He must eat, but first, the medicine. Aston, Roland called it. There were 6 pills. 3 now, 3 later. He pops the not quite paper, not quite glass lid off the cup and swallows the pills. The first swallow amazed him so completely that for a moment he only lay there propped against a rock, his eyes so wide and still and full of reflected starlight that he would surely have been taken for dead already by anyone who happened to pass by. Then he drank, greedily, holding the cup in both hands, the rotted, pulsing hurt in the stumps of his fingers barely noticed in his total absorption with the drink. Sweet! God, such sweetness, such sweetness, such! It's the sweetest thing he's ever had in his long life. Even sweeter than a Martin the Court Wizard, a notorious glutton, would drink his tea. He chugs it, chokes on an ice cube, and gets brain freeze. The sugar revitalizes him. Sugar white powder. He wonders if cocaine was the word for sugar in Eddie's world. But that couldn't be, he reasoned. Eddie bought the soda while being tracked by the priest of customs, whereas he had to smuggle the cocaine. The fever lightened, just a little, and Roland didn't feel like he was a foot from death anymore. Maybe 2 feet now. He thanked God and Eddie Dean. He started eating the popkins, what Eddie called hot dogs. Roland didn't like the idea of eating dogs, but beggars can't be choosers, especially not dying beggars. He likes the Tudor fish a lot more than these, and goddamn was the Pepsi marvelous. He ate everything and returned to Eddie, who was in the carriage surrounded by other carriages on a meadow road, with not a horse in sight. Eddie was ready when the pizza truck pulled up and exposed the face of Cole Vincent, and behind him, old double ugly Jack Andolini, as Henry called him, but never to his face. 2 of Balazar's top goons. They're trying to persuade Eddie into the truck. They have his brother. Eddie is desperate for a fix. Roland manages to get Eddie to keep calm. He has to play along with them and go to Balazar's club called The Tower. Enrico Balazar builds tall, elaborate houses of cards. He is methodical and takes his time to build them higher and higher. He's an intelligent man, calculating and cold. While Eddie is being interrogated by Balazar and Jack Andolini, Henry is in another room being forced to play Trivial Pursuit with 2 of Balazar's goons. His brain is so fucked on heroin the only answer he can give is Johnny Cash. When asked, who wrote A Boy Named Sue? Who goes by the man in black? Henry answered Walter Brennan, and asked for another fix as the goons laughed and laughed. They grabbed a cigar box and jammed a needle into his scarred elbow. Eddie swears up and down that he has the drugs. In fact, he has them here. If he could just go to the bathroom right there in the office, he could get them. They're not playing games. But Balazar is curious at the confidence in this man. Maybe he isn't bullshitting. They make Eddie strip at gunpoint, and for the second time that day, someone wore Eddie like a watch. There was no drugs on him or in him. The goons in the other room noticed too late that Henry stopped breathing. Balazar agrees to let Eddie go into the bathroom, but, naked as he is, and with Jack pointing a gun at him the whole time, it is not a request. In the bathroom, Andolini had had about enough of Eddie's shit, and he raised his gun to strike Eddie, when his eyes suddenly turned blue and a voice that wasn't his shouted to grab him. A door-shaped hole in reality came into existence 3 feet behind Eddie. Andolini could see a dark beach and things moving. He still brings down the gun and bloodies Eddie's mouth. Jack Andolini realized too late that he and Eddie were falling backwards through the door. We'll have to move very fast, or we'll have to find ourselves basted in a hot oast, Roland had said. And Eddie was pretty sure the guy meant
that if they didn't shuck and jive at damn near the speed of light, their gooses were going to be cooked. Andolini didn't know what had happened. Part of him was sure he had gone crazy. Part was sure Eddie had dropped him or gassed him or something like that. Part believed that the vengeful god of his childhood had finally tired of his evils and plucked him away from the world he knew and set him down in this weird purgatory. Andolini was scared now, seeing a beam of light from the bathroom door shine down onto the rocky beach. Then, in his squabble with Eddie, he saw Roland. Andolini snapped his head around, and what he saw threw him off balance again. There was a guy standing there, only he looked more like a ghost than a guy. Not exactly Casper the Friendly Ghost either. The swaying figure's white, haggard face was rough with beard stubble. His shirt was in tatters, which blew back behind him in twisted ribbons, showing the starved stack of his ribs. A filthy rag was wrapped around his right hand. He looked sick, sick and dying, but even so, he also looked tough enough to make Andolini feel like a soft-boiled egg. And the Joker was wearing a pair of guns. They looked older than the hills, old enough to come from a Wild West museum, but they were guns just the same. They might even really work, and Andolini suddenly realized that he was going to have to take care of the white-faced man right away. In a flash of blue summer lightning, Roland drew his left gun and pulled the trigger, but it misfired with a wet shell. Eddie threw a rock at Andolini's head, tearing a flap from his scalp and causing Roland's next shot to miss. His third shot didn't miss, nor did it misfire. He aimed for the gun in Andolini's hand instead of his head, and something Roland had only ever seen twice in his long and torturous life exploded before him. Bad luck for you, fellow, Roland thought. His bullet struck the chamber of Andolini's gun as he was about to fire and deleted everything from his palm down and nearly blew off his jaw. He lay screaming on the beach as Eddie pleads with Roland to put him down, but it was too late. The lobstrosities began to rip Jack Antolini apart and eat him alive. It was time to go back through the door and give Balazar his drugs. Only this time, Roland will come with Eddie. Eddie felt he deserved a fix. With great hesitation, Roland tells Eddie to take one of his guns. Take this, Roland said, and gestured at the ancient revolver slung low on his right hip. Did not point. There was no fingers to point with, only a bulky rag-wrapped bundle. It's no good to me now. Perhaps never again. The sandalwood grips of the revolver were so smooth that Eddie's first act upon receiving it was to nearly drop it on his toes. The thing was so big it looked prehistoric, so heavy that he knew he would have to lift it two-handed. The recoil, he thought, is apt to drive me right through the nearest wall. That is, if it fires at all. Yet there was some part of him that wanted to hold it, that responded to its perfectly expressed purpose, that sensed its dim and bloody history and wanted to be a part of it. No one but the best ever held this baby in his hand, Eddie thought. Until now, at least. On the other side of the bathroom door, Balazar was growing nervous and called for his goons who tell him about the problem with Henry. Eddie searched the medicine cabinet and found some very unsavory things and Keflex, an antibiotic familiar to junkies. Eddie overheard them say they killed his brother through the door. They killed my brother, the prisoner said. The gunslinger said nothing. He only watched and thought. The bottle's in the sink. That's what I need. Or what he thinks I need. The packets. Don't forget. Don't forget. From the other room. Kill him, Jack. Neither Eddie nor the gunslinger took any notice of this. They killed my brother. They killed Henry. In the other room, Balazar was now talking about how taking Eddie's head is a trophy. The gunslinger found some odd comfort in this. Not everything in this world was different from his own, it seemed. Roland asks Eddie if he wants to do something about it or if he just wants to stand there. Eddie wants to do something about it, he says, raising the revolver. And what is it you want to do? Roland asked. And his voice seemed so distant to his own ears. He was sick, full of fever, but what was happening to him now was the onset of a different fever, one which was all too familiar. It was the fever that had overtaken him in Tull. It was battle fire, hazing all thought, leaving only the need to stop thinking and start shooting. I want to go to war, Eddie Deem said calmly. Eddie and Roland burst from the bathroom and start firing. On the beach, Roland's guns were loud. In here, they were deafening. They blew back the goons with force and caused their automatics and shotguns to fly out of their hands. One goon entered with a heavy machine gun he could hardly wield and cut one of the other goons in half with it. Eddie disintegrated Balazar's shoulder when Roland's gun misfired. Eddie deleted another goon from the eyebrows up before taking a shot in the left bicep from Balazar. Roland was impressed with how well Eddie was in a gunfight for a naked junkie. He couldn't reload with one hand and picked up one of the automatics off the ground. Balazar got up, not seeing Roland.
He died with a surprised look as Roland put 4 rounds in him with the dirty, cheap-feeling little automatic. One of the goons that was watching Henry was laughing now as he came towards the room. He had a gift for Eddie.
I got something for you, Eddie, Kevin Blake said from the hallway. I thought you might want it for a souvenir, you know.
What Balazar had not been able to do to the young Dean brother, Kevin had done to the elder. He lobbed Henry Dean's severed head through the doorway. Eddie saw what it was and screamed. He ran towards the door, heedless of the splinters of glass and wood that punched into his bare feet, screaming, shooting, firing the last live shell in the big revolver as he went. Eddie kept dry firing the revolver as Roland blew away the head of the final goon. Eddie couldn't stop firing at the corpse. Eddie couldn't stop firing at the corpse while screaming and sobbing. He tried to get Eddie's attention, but he was struck with his own gun. Roland felt blood and blacked out for a little more than 2 minutes. His gun was on his chest, and Eddie wasn't in the hallway. He gathered his bearings and Eddie's clothes when he saw him sitting on the floor in the splinters and glass, cradling his brother's head and sobbing. The SWAT team was beginning to swarm outside, and it was time to go. Back through the door.
What's on the other side of that door for me?
Eddie asked the gunslinger quietly.
Go on and tell me. If you can tell me, maybe I'll come. But if you lie, I'll know.
Probably death, the gunslinger said. But before that happens, I don't think that you'll be bored. I want you to join me on a quest, of course. All will probably end in death for the 4 of us in a strange place. But if we should win through, his eyes gleamed. If we win through, Eddie, you'll see something beyond all the beliefs of all your dreams.
What thing?
The Dark Tower. Where is this tower? Far from the beach where you found me. How far, I know not. They crossed the threshold, and as the adrenaline wore off, Eddie could feel the pain of withdrawals and wanted to go back for a fix. Just a small fix. Anything. He needed a little. He needed his heroin. But that part of his life is over now, as Roland shut the door and it clattered useless to the sand and rocks. Roland recognized some of the words on the medicine. He took two, and his last 3 acid and collapsed in the sand next to Eddie. He held him as best he could, and they fell asleep in each other's arms. Time after that night was like a deck of cards shuffling for Roland and his infection. It was about a week of suffering and travel for both of them, as Eddie suffered his heroin withdrawals and Roland battled his infection. Eddie feeding the weak Roland medicine and meat from the lobstrosities, but God knows why. Eddie blames Roland for kidnapping him and holding him there. But still, he keeps him alive. He hates him, but he needs him because he needs him. Eddie is a heroin junkie, just as Roland is a tower junkie. In the days that pass, Roland recovers slightly, not fully, but enough. For now, they bond, just a little, as Eddie tells Roland of his life, the dependency he shares with his brother, and the sister who got hit by a car as a kid. After days of walking the shore, Eddie spots it, about 3 miles up the beach, the next door. The Lady of Shadows, it said as they approached. Eddie was determined to go through with Roland. He wanted to go through, find some heroin, but that's not how it worked. The door could open to anywhere and anyone. For all Roland knew, the Lady of Shadows had 8 eyes and 9 arms like Suvia. Eddie wasn't asking, and reached for Roland's gun. Roland let him. He opened the door. A young woman, Odetta Holmes, is sitting in the back seat of her town car, having a conversation with her driver Andrew about the last gunslinger. John F. Kennedy. The driver wasn't too unhappy when Oswald pulled the trigger just 3 months ago. The car was heading up Fifth Avenue towards Central Park West. As she half-heartedly agrees with Andrew, not really minding his words, a voice whispers in her head that she is a liar. The voice is not her own. You are a liar, a voice spoke up in her mind. This voice was a voice she heard quite often. She had even named it. It was the voice of the goad. You understand perfectly and agree completely. Lie to Andrew if you feel it necessary, but for God's sake, don't lie to yourself, woman. She could feel one of her headaches brewing. Andrew asks her how Oxford Town was. She doesn't want to answer him, but she does. She was locked in a cage and taunted and teased till she soiled herself like an animal. Andrew is remorseful, and Odetta apologizes. They ride in silence the rest of the drive. Sometimes Odetta would black out for hours, and sometimes for days. Andrew always wants to ask where she's been, but every time he's met with a truly puzzled look. Before she called Andrew to pick her up the next morning, Odetta had been missing for 3 weeks. Andrew rang the doorman, Mr. Howard, and asked how long she'd been in. Only about 20 minutes, Andrew answers. Mr. Howard begins unloading Detta's luggage and her wheelchair. Since August 19th of 1959, about 5.5 years before, from the knees down of Miss Holmes has been missing like those days and weeks she experienced. Before the subway incident, Detta Walker had only been conscious a handful of times. Detta would steal, rob, and toy with white fraternity boys, denying them until they hurled slurs at her and she walked away proud. The body she inhabited was that of a woman who had inherited millions but was not known and didn't matter. The scarf was white, the edging blue, and there was that same little breaking sense of pleasure. She sat in the back seat of the taxi, and oblivious of the driver, held the scarf in one hand, looking at it fixedly. In 1959, Odetta could have taken the limo anywhere as the heiress of the Holmes dental fortune. But she didn't want to be seen that way as a wealthy black woman in the 50s. She didn't want to be seen at all, and she paid for it that day with her legs and half of her mind. She was a proud champion for civil rights. Odetta did not know Detta existed, nor Detta knew of Odetta. It was Eddie Dean's world he saw beyond, that it was a mess of lights, people, and more things than he ever saw before. Things shaped like ladies that were being sold, some under glass, and some in piles being sold through the doorway, moved through the Ladies of Shadow's eyes, as it did with Eddie Dean's. The view swooped and made Roland nauseous, but to Eddie it was comforting. Roland had never seen a movie, but Eddie had seen thousands, and the view moved like a Steadicam. The owner of the black hands they saw was buying a scarf and paying in cash. Through the doorway, Eddie could smell New York, and New York meant dope. Roland and Eddie had a long back and forth about going through the door together, but Roland knows that Eddie just wants to go through to get his drugs. The view in the door shows the hands begin to scoop things at random into a purse. Before Eddie could finish threatening Roland, he crossed through the door and his body falls limp. In 1959, a pretty black woman was waiting for the A train in jeans and a khaki shirt, and someone pushed her in front of the oncoming train. As the paramedics tried to help Odetta, Detta was barking back at them, demanding to know if they got the honky mafa what did this to her. Then she passed out. For the most part, since the incident, Odetta Holmes was in control. But Detta would appear more frequently. When Roland appeared in their head, Detta screamed because she could sense that the invading consciousness was white. Shoppers and onlookers stopped and scared at the screaming woman frozen in the middle of stuffing jewelry into her purse, and security was called. Roland was astounded by the pit of hate he found himself in, and heard the screaming and saw the security guard charging towards them. He took control and felt the strange duality of the woman, but had no time to think upon it. Roland began to push the chair away as the purse fell to the ground and spilling its goods, tripping the security guard. He turned the chair and began to shove it forward. The aisle rolled past them. People dived away to either side. The purse was lost, spilling Detta's credentials and stolen treasure in a wide trail along the floor. The security guard picked himself up, massaging his aching ass, and began after her again, limping a little now. The wheelchair flashed into one of the dressing rooms. The door slammed, just clearing the push handles on the back. Got you now, bitch, Jimmy thought, and I'm going to give you one hell of a scare. I don't care if you got 5 orphan children and only a year to live. I'm not gonna hurt you, but oh babe, I'm gonna shake your dice. He beat the floor walker to the dressing room, slammed the door open with his left shoulder, and it was empty. The dressing room was empty. No woman, no wheelchair. The moment the gunslinger heard the dressing room door bang shut behind him, he rammed the wheelchair around in a half turn looking for the doorway. If Eddie had done what he promised, it would be gone. But the door was open. Roland wheeled the Lady of Shadows through it. Not long after, Roland would think. Any other woman, crippled or otherwise, suddenly shoved all the way down the aisle of the mart in which she was doing business, monkey business, you may call it if you like, by a stranger inside her head, shoved into a little room while some man behind her yelled for her to stop, then suddenly turned, shove again where there was no room in which to shove. Then, finding herself suddenly in an entirely different world, I think any other woman under those circumstances would have most certainly asked, "Where am I?" before all else. Instead, Odetta Holmes asked almost pleasantly, "What exactly are you planning to do with that knife, young man?" Odetta is more confused than anything about where she is. The last thing she remembered was watching the news in her robe at home, not shoplifting at a Macy's. This really confuses Roland and Eddie. She must be in shock. Odetta breaks down in tears as Eddie tells her she ain't in Kansas anymore. When Roland entered the woman's mind, it was not like when he entered Eddie's. He was unnoticed in Eddie's mind until he chose to reveal himself.
The moment he entered the woman's mind, she was fighting him like a cat. No surprise at the invading stranger, only rage, and the attempt to cut him loose. Being in Eddie's mind was akin to being in a room with jittery, sweaty walls. Being in her mind was like laying naked in the dark with venomous snakes crawling all over you, until they came through the door, and the very end changed her mind. Eddie pushes past Roland to comfort the crying Odetta. She was just watching the news to see if her friends made it out of Oxford town alive. Now she's wherever the hell here even is. He comforts her by talking about how he's also from New York. Roland thinks Eddie will be okay. His brother is dead, and now he has someone else to take care of. Eddie will be okay. But he felt a pang, a deep reproachful hurt in his heart. He was capable of shooting with his left hand anyway, of killing, of going on and on, slamming with brutal relentlessness through miles and years, even dimensions. It seemed, in search of the tower, he was capable of survival, sometimes even of protection. He had saved the boy Jake from a slow death at the way station, from consumption by the Oracle at the foot of the mountains, but in the end he had let Jake die. Nor had this been by accident. He had committed a conscious act of damnation. He watched the two of them, watched Eddie hug her, assure her it was going to be all right. He could not have done that. And now the ruin in his heart was joined by stealthy fear. If you have given up your heart for the tower, Roland, you have already lost. A heartless creature is a loveless creature, and a loveless creature is a beast. To be a beast is perhaps bearable, although the man who has become one will surely pay hell's own price in the end. But what if you should gain your object? What if you should, heartless, actually storm the Dark Tower and win it? If there is naught but darkness in your heart, what could you do except degenerate from beast to monster? To gain one's object as a beast would be bitterly comic, like giving a magnifying glass to an elephant. But to gain one's object as a monster? To pay hell is one thing, but do you want to own it? Roland pieces together that the reason she didn't remember is because she was two, and one was very dangerous. While Roland went off to fetch water, Eddie tells Odetta of his whole venture with Roland, from the plane to most of the shootout, only omitting some details. She's about 5 years older than Eddie, he guesses. He thinks she has a lovely name, Odetta Holmes, and strong but smooth arms that reminded him of the sea. She's in denial and believes that she's either still trapped in a cage in Oxford Town hallucinating, or she must be in a coma. Or maybe a brick struck her in the head again, like it did when she was a child and Detta Walker was birthed. He tries to explain to her that he's only 23 years old, born in 1963, 1 year before Roland invaded her mind and pulled her through the door. Eddie asks about the brick. She starts telling him the story, and a headache grows in her. After her Aunt Blue's wedding, her father called the cab. When the driver arrived, saw the family was colored, and sped off. Not wanting to call another cab and risk the same embarrassment, her father decides it's a nice day enough for a walk. Even it's only a little over a mile anyway. When walking in front of an abandoned, crumbling apartment building, everything went dark, and that's when the 5-year-old Odetta started having vivid dreams. She's either having a dream just like that, or she's gone insane. Eddie tells her of his addiction. She's surprised he seems spiffy for an addict, despite rinsing and wearing the same clothes for God knows how long. Every morning he shaved the stubble with Roland's knife. After Vietnam, Henry taught Eddie a proper shaving, toothbrushing, and needle pricking habit that all stuck. The two of them swapped slang from their respective times, trying to find middle ground and not push each other's buttons. Her being a civil rights socialite, and him being a junkie from Co op City. Roland returns with the water. His infection is also returning. Balazar didn't have enough Keflex. Eddie tells Roland that Odetta just can't believe that she's actually here on the beach of another land. That's because she's not the same woman he pulled through, he tells him. And Eddie realizes it too, from the snarling face he saw in the mirror through the doorway when he held the knife to Roland's limp, unconscious throat. Roland tells him that he needs to be on his guard, even if he was falling in love with her. The woman whose mind he entered was as deadly as the lobstrosities. In the middle of the night, Detta's eyes slammed open, full of intelligence and starlight. She remembered everything that's happened. A bad man honky and a really bad man honky kidnapped her, tied her up, and abused her, calling her slurs and taunting her, while they just laughed and laughed at her and shoved bits of poisoned beef in her face, tempting her to eat. This section here uses more N words than ranked league servers, so be warned. When she awoke, she was under a blanket in the sand, as were the two sleeping bad men next to her.
She slithered, as quiet as she could, across the sand to Roland's gun belt. She pulled one, checked that it was loaded, pulled the hammer, and held it to Eddie's temple. Roland watched all of this through one half-opened eye. The gun misfired with a wet shell. Earlier, after Roland came back with the water, he and Eddie held palaver. Odetta had fallen asleep in her wheelchair. They made her as comfy as fawn as they could in the sand, and set a portion of lobstrosity meat aside for her in the morning. Roland was on his guard. When he was sure the two were both deep asleep, at least 3 hours, he loaded his ancient heavy revolvers with wet shells and set the belt down by Eddie. This hurt him to do. For hours later, he watched her stir. This is the woman he had drawn through the door. She flicked the gun around to bash Eddie's skull in, but he stirred enough to only get struck on the jaw. They asked the three As the three of them fought and tussled in the sand, she bit and snarled while the two tried to get the gun from her. They managed to restrain her. The shrieking, convulsing thing bound to the chair was the mind Roland entered through the door. Eddie theorizes she could be schizophrenic and that the two were not aware of each other. When Eddie watched the three of them in the wheelchair come through the door, it was like watching a movie through someone else's eyes, like being in two places at once, being turned inside out. That's what Roland had severed as they crossed. For just the briefest of moments, Odetta and Detta looked at each other. Eddie looked at Roland, saw he was asking a serious question for a serious reason, or thought he was, and took a minute to think back. It's really hard to describe, man. It was like looking in that door. That's what freaked me out. When you see someone move in that door, it's like you're moving with them. You know what I'm talking about. Roland nodded. Well, I watched it like it was a movie. Never mind. It's not important until the very end. Then you turned her towards this side of the doorway, and for the first time I was looking at myself. It was like he groped and couldn't find nothing. I don't know. It should have been like looking in a mirror, I guess, but it wasn't because it was like looking at another person. It was like being turned inside out, like being in two places at the same time. Shit, I don't know. But the gunslinger was thunderstruck. That was what he had sensed when they came through. That was what had happened to her. No, not just her, them. For a moment, Detta and Odetta had looked at each other. Not the way one would look at her reflection in a mirror, but as separate people. The mirror became a window pane, and for a moment Odetta had seen Detta, and Detta had seen Odetta, and had been equally horror struck. Roland thinks the two will need to battle or join. Roland lays awake, feeling the fever grow in him and finding no solution to his problem. The next day was a nightmare as Detta awoke in the pilot's seat. It's real hard to push a wheelchair in the sand, especially when there's a bound racist caricature barking at your every move. Detta managed to reach the handbrake and pulled it several times so the chair would tip and knock them into the sand. It was a big ass heavy 1960s wheelchair, a lot of weight for them to keep uprighting. She did this for no other reason than to slow them down. They try to feed her the remaining lobstrosity meat again, and she refuses. They're trying to feed her putrid, rotting meat while they eat salt beef and some kind of beer in a flask. Eddie hasn't seen beef since the plane, and Roland since the last of his jerky. As for beer, the last time he saw beer was in Toll. That night, they fire the last good shell for more lobstrosity meat. The rest now may all be duds. Detta screams through the night. Every moment, she catches Roland and Eddie finally falling asleep. Roland tries hard to reason with Odetta if she's in there anywhere. Listen, he said. Eddie could scarcely credit the silky quality of Roland's voice. He could see much the same deep surprise on Detta's face, only their fear was joined to it. Listen to me, Odetta. Who you callin' Odetta? Dat ain't my name. Shut up, bitch, the gunslinger said in a growl, and then, reverting to the same silken voice, if you hear me, and you can control her at all, why you talking at me dat way? Why you talking like you was talking to somebody else? You quit that honky job. You just quit it now, you hear me? Keep her shut up. I can gag her, but I don't want to do that. A hard gag is a dangerous business. People choke. Odetta. His voice was a whisper. His voice was a whisper, like the onset of rain. She fell silent, staring at him with huge eyes. Eddie had never in his life seen such hate and fear combined in human eyes. I don't think this bitch would care if she did die on a hard gag. She wants to die, but maybe even more so, she wants you to die. But you haven't died. Not so far, and I don't think Detta is brand new in your life. She feels too at home in you, so maybe you can hear what I'm saying.
and maybe you can keep some control over her, even if you don't come out yet. Don't let her wake us a third time, Odetta. I don't want to have to gag her, but if I have to, I will. He got up, left without looking back, rolled himself into his blanket again, and promptly fell asleep. She was still staring at him, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. Honky voodoo bullshit, she whispered. Days and miles of beach go by. The beach slowly started to go from sand to poor soil. They could see sprouts of weeds start growing in the cracks. They could see hills in the distance, and Eddie thought for a long time the beach may have been endless. The sickly veins were re-emerging on Roland's arm. Eddie could see him growing weaker and fading. The next morning, around 10 o'clock, Detta was about to vomit and began shrieking about her headache before slumping over in her chair. Before they could check if she died from a stroke or starvation, Odetta's eyes opened. That's when Roland's legs give and he collapses, some 30 miles south of where the Western Sea had ended. Pushing Odetta through the sand was like gliding with how easy it felt just by having her back. Eddie gets her to eat finally and goes to tend to the gunslinger. Roland regains consciousness and warns Eddie that he must be on his guard, even more so now. If the other should return, she will kill him. Eddie is going to have to push Odetta to the next door, keep her sheltered, and come back for Roland with the chair. He gives him a gun with shells that Roland suspects to be the least wet, and hopes at least two of them would fire, should anything happen. Odetta tells Eddie she loves him, and that she's thankful that he and even Roland have been so patient with her, even though the gunslinger scares her. That night, Eddie and Odetta share a tender moment wishing upon the star-filled sky. They looked at each other, and he saw that tears were streaming down her cheeks. His own came, and he let them fall in her sight. This was not a shame, but an inexpressible relief. They smiled at each other. Have I wish tonight, Eddie said and thought. Please always you. Have the wish I wish tonight, she echoed, and thought, if I must die in this odd place, let it not be too hard, and let this good young man be with me. I'm sorry I cried, she said, wiping her eyes. I don't usually, but it's been a very trying day, he finished for her. Yes, and you need to eat, Eddie. You do too. I just hope it doesn't make me sick again. He smiled at her. I don't think it will. Later, with strange galaxies turning in slow gavotte overhead, neither thought the act of love had ever been so sweet, so full. The next day, Odetta spots it half an hour before Eddie does. The third door. Her eyes are as good as Roland's, he thinks. They start to hear insects for the first time in a long time and spot birds other than seagulls. Neither of them could read the words written in the high speech on the door. They see the thickness of it from one side, the hinges that bite into nothing, and how the door vanished when they tried to see it from behind. The knob gave way for neither of them, and they both knew it was for Roland alone. Eddie needs to go back for Roland now. He wants to leave her with the gun to defend herself, but even Odetta is against the idea. But there are things out here other than lobstrosities. She doesn't want it, but he doesn't want anything to happen to her. Not her. He's not arguing, and after a wildcat calls in the distance, she agrees, very reluctantly. They kiss, and he heads south back for Roland. Let her be safe. Let my beloved be safe, he hopes. Eddie ran the entire way back. Roland noticed the scrawny drug addict he pulled through the door was looking more like a man, and that he gave her the gun. Roland was looking as bad as when they first met, and the fever heat was radiating off of him once more. He gets Eddie to rest for just a little, and they carry on after another meal of lobster meat. Pushing Roland was like pushing iron bars compared to Detta. By the next morning, the door was in view, and Odetta wasn't. The pusher, the door read. Eddie went off to find Odetta. He needs to find her. But Roland wants Eddie to go through the door with him. But Eddie needs to find her. There's dangerous things out here, and they both know, deep down, the most dangerous of all had taken her. A quarter mile away, that danger was watching them. Eddie's mind would not change. Roland gives Eddie the remaining gun, and he opens the door. His body falls limp in the sand as he crosses over. Eddie fought the weariness, looked at the unmoving hills with eyes which felt swollen and heavy, and wondered how long it might be before Roland came back with the third, the pusher, whoever he or she was. Odetta? He called without much hope. Only silence answered. And for Eddie, the time of waiting began. When the gunslinger entered Eddie had experienced a moment of nausea and he had a sense of being watched. This Roland hadn't felt, Eddie had told him later. He'd had, in other words, some vague sense of the gunslinger's presence. With Detta, Roland had been forced to come forward immediately. Like it or not, she hadn't just sensed him. In a queer way, it seemed that she had been waiting for him or another more frequent visitor. Either way, she had been totally aware of his presence from the first moment he had been in her. Jack Mort didn't feel a thing. He was too intent on the boy. He had been watching the boy for the last 2 weeks. Today, he was going to push him. Roland was seeing Jake, the boy he chose to sacrifice, through this man's eyes. The man was going to push the boy into oncoming traffic. He kept following him like he had been for the last few weeks. Roland fears for a moment that he is in the head of the man in black. One last trick from old Martin, but the man in black was nowhere to be seen. Jack was a successful CPA. Pushing was just his hobby. The man in black and the oracle told Roland his fated three were the prisoner, the lady of shadows, and death. But not for you. But the third door was labeled the pusher. Roland surmises that he is the third, that he must be death. Roland retreated back into the man's mind and saw the horror and the connection between Jack Mort and Odetta. He sees the man's memory of a kindly looking family walking below the abandoned building he was hiding in. His intention was to drop a brick on somebody, and this little girl was a great target for a depth charge, as he called it all the other times he's done this. Whenever the brick connected with a victim, he came in his pants. Years later, he dropped many a brick and pushed many a people in that time. He pushed an unsuspecting woman waiting patiently for her train. He didn't know it was one of his depth charge victims until cutting out news clippings later. It was pure bad luck that their paths crossed twice. It was not racially motivated or a fixation, just bad caw. Roland heard the laughter of the man in black and then fainted inside Jack Mort's head. He came to hours later in the man's office. He panics briefly. Eddie couldn't have stayed awake for much longer. He looks into the door and sees the shadow of a wheelchair and an incomplete person. An obvious trap to Roland. The second he comes back through, she's going to end him. Time is running short. He takes full control of Jack Mort. We cut back to earlier, and Detta is watching Eddie scream for the other woman on the beach. He got close and passed her hiding spot a couple of times. He looked just like a kid to her. So young. She can't just kill him. She needs him alive to lure the really bad man back and make him return her to her world. Eddie had passed out. She felt slight pity for him and hated that. She was surprised, disgusted, and frightened to feel a sudden stab of pity for the white boy down there. He looked like nothing so much as a little squirt who had tried to stay up until midnight on New Year's Eve and lost the race. Then she remembered the way he and the really bad man had tried to get her to eat poisoned food and teased her with their own, always snatching away at the last second. At least, until they got scared she might die. If they were scared you might die, why'd they try to get you to eat poison in the first place? The question scared her the way that momentary feeling of pity had scared her. She wasn't used to questioning herself, and furthermore, the questioning voice in her mind didn't seem like her voice at all. She slithers to Roland's purse, and then to Eddie. She throws a noose around his neck from behind and pulls him down to the sand with her strong arms. Eddie hears Roland's voice in his mind. She crept up on you while you were asleep, Eddie. It was the gunslinger's voice, of course. It doesn't do any good to say I told you so now, but I told you so. This is what romance gets you. A noose around your neck, and a crazy woman with 2 guns somewhere behind you. But if she was going to kill me, she already would have done it. She would have done it while I was asleep. And what is it that you think she's going to do, Eddie? Hand you an all expenses paid trip for two to Disney World? She hogties him and drags him below the high tide line and left to wait for dark, for the lobstrosities to come ask their hungry questions. Now, Jack Mort knew Roland was in his body. He would feel bad taking control of anyone else so abruptly, but Jack Mort was a monster, worse than Detta Walker. He could hear the man screaming, "Who are you? What's going on?" But the gunslinger ignored these pleas. He focused on his short to-do list and felt nothing about using the man's mind as an encyclopedia and atlas. The plan he made was rough, but rough was often better than smooth. When it came to planning, There were no creatures in the universe more different than Roland and Jack Moore. When you planned rough, you allowed room for improvisation, and improvisation, at short notice, had always been one of Roland's strong points. He leaves Mort's office building and scans the man's mind that he now calls the Mortsopedia and manages to hail a taxi. This whole section of the book is full of incredibly fun, fish out of water moments and is absolutely worth a read. He gets to a sporting goods shop, where the two cops parked across the street gossip to each other about the square that just walked into the shop that they've been watching. Inside, Roland awkwardly tries to buy ammunition. He is astounded by the amount of rounds that come in a box and thinks it's too good to be true. The clerk won't sell them to him because Jack Morton does not own a handgun permit with a photo. Roland remembers the two gunslingers he saw outside and improvises a plan. He asks the clerk to see something behind the counter, and when his back is turned, he tosses Jack Mort's wallet on the floor and kicks it under the counter. He leaves the shop and goes to talk to the doughy looking gunslingers outside. He tells them the tradesman in that shop stole his wallet. The cops have been casing this joint for a while under suspicion that the owner is selling illegal weapons, and they've been waiting for a reason. Before the odd man answered any of the cops' questions, he pauses for a brief second. Years later, one of the cops found the perfect comparison for the man. I'm going to read this whole section here because it's really, really fun. There was something about the guy. O'Meara couldn't put his finger on it then, but remembered later on when there weren't so many other things to think about. But years later was a brief moment of epiphany when O'Meara took his two sons to the Museum of Science in Boston. They had a machine there, a computer which played tic-tac-toe, and unless you put your X in the middle of the square your first move, the machine fucked you over every time. But there was always a pause as it checked its memory for all possible gambits. He and his boys had been fascinated, but there was something spooky about it. And when he remembered Blue Suit, he remembered because Blue Suit had had that same fucking habit. Talking to him had been like talking to a robot. Delavan had no such feeling, but 9 years later, when he took his own son, then 18 and about to start college, to the movies one night, Delavan would rise unexpectedly to his feet, about 30 minutes into the feature and scream, "It's him! That's him! That's the guy in the fucking blue suit! The guy who was at Clay." Somebody would shout down in front, but needn't have bothered. Delavan, 70 pounds overweight and a heavy smoker, would be struck by a fatal heart attack before the complainer even got the second word. The man in the blue suit who approached their cruiser that day and told them about his stolen wallet didn't look like the star of the movie, but the dead delivery of words had been the same. So had been the somehow relentless yet graceful way he moved. The movie, of course, had been The Terminator. The two cops finally have enough to go off of and enter the shop. Roland follows them 30 seconds later, while the clerk, Fat Johnny, is pleading his innocence. Roland took one final step forward. He cupped Delavan's right cheek in one hand, O'Meara's left cheek in the other, and all of a sudden, a day Fat Johnny Holden believed had to have hit rock bottom had gotten a lot worse. The spook in the blue suit brought the cops' heads together hard enough to make a sound like rocks wrapped in felt colliding with each other. The cops fell in a heap. The man in the gold-rimmed specs stood. He was pointing the .357 mag at Fat Johnny. The muzzle looked big enough to hold a moon rocket. Fat Johnny was intimidated into staying still, and the cops were still alive, thankfully. Even though Roland didn't like these guys, they were still gunslingers, and Roland didn't want to kill a fellow gunslinger, though he had in the past. Had Elaine not fallen before his and Cuthbert's smoking barrels? He takes 4 boxes of rounds, 200 in total. He takes the cops' gun belts and makes Fat Johnny handcuff, fart, and piss himself. His vision cleared and he realized what the crazy nut had done. He had taken the cops' guns, strapped them around his waist. With the suit and tie, the effect should have been ludicrous, but somehow it wasn't. He pays for the ammunition with Jack Mort's money and heads to the nearest drugstore. After this close call, Fat Johnny wanted to get right with God. Back on the other side of the door, Eddie's will was slipping as the sun slowly descended as Detta taunts him. He hoped he would be able to die without screaming. He didn't think this would be possible, but he intended to try. Eddie tried to turn his head to avoid the first one, but he was too slow. It ripped off a swatch of his face with one claw, splattering his left eye to jelly and revealing the bright gleam of bone in twilight as it asked its questions, and the really bad woman laughed. "Stop it," Roland commanded himself. "Thinking such thoughts is worse than helpless. It is a distraction, and it need not be. There may still be time." And there still was. In his many years, Roland had known magicians, enchanters, and alchemists, an especially bad magician known as Flag, as Martin, and Walter, the putrid man in black. He was surprised at the sterility of Cat's pharmacy. He had expected a dim room with candlelight and dusty vials of powder and potions. The pharmacist on the phone looked across the counter as he heard the thundering pop to see a man in a tailored blue suit and gold-rimmed glasses, with two gun belts slung below his hips, pointing a gun at him, and the security guard on the floor holding his bleeding hand. The man in the blue suit demanded Keflex. He confused the pharmacist greatly. Who holds up a pharmacy for penicillin? He shoots the knife out of a would-be do-gooder's hand and pays for the $60 worth of Keflex with Jack Mort's $6,500 golden Rolex watch. As the sun gets lower on Midworld, the two cops Roland knocked out get to their feet and go after him with shotguns. They follow his path, listening to the police dispatch. One of the cops blindly fired his scatter rifle into the drugstore, unthinking of any civilian casualties that could result. This act was disgusting to Roland. These men were gunslingers. They can't know if there are still innocent people in here or not, he thought. They can't know, and yet they use a scatter rifle just the same. It was unforgivable. He felt anger and suppressed it. They were gunslingers. Better to believe their brains had been addled by the head knocking they'd taken than to believe they'd done such a thing knowingly, without care for whom they might hurt or kill. They would expect him to either run or shoot. Roland crouches and waits. He knocks the first cop to enter out with the butt of his own pistol. He takes the scatter rifle and clubs the second across the face with it. Roland stood in the doorway, oblivious to the approaching sirens. He broke the scatter rifle, then worked the pump action, ejecting all the fat red cartridges onto Deleving's body. That done, he dropped the gun itself onto Delevin. "You're a dangerous fool who should be sent west," he told the unconscious man. "You have forgotten the face of your father." He gets into the cop car and tries to contact Jack Mort. Roland doesn't know how to drive. He tries to make contact and gets no coherent answer. Mort just went on screaming. The gunslinger recognized this as hysteria, but one which was not entirely genuine. Jack Mort was having hysterics on purpose as a way of avoiding any conversation with this weird kidnapper. "Listen," the gunslinger told him, "I only have time to say this and everything else once. My time has grown very short. If you do not answer my question, I am going to put your right thumb into your right eye. I'll jam it in as far as it will go, and then I'll pull your eyeball right out of your head and wipe it on the seat of this carriage like a booger. I can get along with one eye just fine, and after all, it isn't as if it were mine." Jack Mort agrees, and he starts driving to the village. This monster, who killed and maimed God knows how many innocents, was too afraid to lose one of his own precious eyes. Roland was taking him to the A train, where Jack Mort pushed one Odetta Holmes in front of it some years ago. More cops arrive on the scene. One with an itchy finger fires on the man in the blue suit before thinking. Roland and Jack's lives were saved by the silver lighter Jack Mort kept in his lapel pocket for the sole purpose of lighting the cigars of his boss, whose job he intended to take. He plays dead for a moment and allows the two cops to get close. He subdues them and tells them to stay put. This is almost over. The poor commuters running out of the station were fleeing from the man in blue suit holding a gun with another strapped below his hip and appeared to be on fire. As the suit burns and Jack Mort screams in pain and horror, Roland puts the ammo boxes and Keflex into Jack Mort's white whore's underwear and heads for the oncoming train. This was almost the time. The moment had almost come. The moment when he would draw the three or lose it all. He could hear the train roaring toward the platform, could see its light. Roland uses all of his mental energy to command the woman on the beach to look through the door. He screams for both women to look through the door as he jumps onto the railing. Roland looked through the door at both of their faces. As he leaps out of the body, Jack Mort dies alone, cut in half by the on-time A train. As he called, as the train bore down upon him, its wheels turning with merciless silver speed, the gunslinger finally turned his head and looked back through the door, and directly into her face. Faces! Both of them, I see. Both of them at the same time. "No!" Jack Mort shrieked, and in the last split second before the train ran down on him, cutting him in two not above the knees but at the waist, Roland lunged at the door and through it. Boxes of ammunition and bottles of pills appeared beside Roland's physical body. His hands clenched spasmodically at them, then relaxed. The gunslinger forced himself up, a way that he was wearing his sick, throbbing body again. aware that Eddie Dean was screaming, aware that Odetta was shrieking in two voices. He looked only for a moment and saw exactly what he had heard. Not one woman, but two. Both were legless, both dark-skinned, both women of great beauty. Nonetheless, one of them was a hag, her interior ugliness not hidden by her outer beauty, but enhanced by it. Roland stared at these twins, who were not really twins at all, but negative and positive images of the same woman. He stared with a feverish, hypnotic intensity. As Odetta and Detta both shriek from having seen each other for the first time in their lives, Roland rushes to try and save Eddie in his diminished body. Detta was made manifest now, and there were two legless women on the beach strangling each other. Neither of them could kill the other. Odetta releases her hands from Detta's throat and embraces the woman instead. For a moment, Detta's hands were a noose. Then they vanished. No, you bitch, Detta screamed, but that scream was infinitely complex, both hateful and grateful. No, you leave me, you just leave me. Odetta had no voice with which to reply. As Roland kicked the first lobstrosity away, and as the second moved in to lunch on a chunk of Eddie's arm, she could only whisper in the witch woman's ear, I love you. For a moment, the hands tightened into a killing noose, and then loosened. She was turning inside out again, and then suddenly, blessedly, she was whole. For the first time since a man named Jack Mort had dropped a brick on the head of a child who was only there to be hit because a white taxi driver had taken one look and driven away. She was whole. She was Odetta Holmes. But the other? Hurry up, bitch, Detta yelled. But it was still her own voice. She and Detta had merged. She had been one. She had been two. Now the gunslinger had drawn a third from her. Hurry up, or they going to be dinner. Suddenly, the brown hands held thunder and began to blow away the encroaching lobstrosities. Roland tries to untie Eddie, but is pushed aside by the newly joined woman. She used Roland's knife to cut Eddie free. This new woman was the third Roland was to draw. Surely. Who are you? He husked as the darkness deeper than night began to take him down. I am three women, he heard her say, and it was as if she was speaking to him from the top of a deep well into which he was falling. I who was, I who had no right to be but was, I am the woman who you have saved. I thank you, gunslinger. She kissed him, and he knew that, but for a long time after, Roland knew only darkness. In the days that passed, Roland thought little of the tower. His strength was slowly returning as they made it out of the sea and into the woods. There would be meat again. No more lobster meat and brackish stream water. Roland manages to shoot a deer, but has trouble skinning it with his clipped hand and his dumb hand. The woman, now calling herself Susanna, offers to help if he'll teach her how. That night they eat like royalty. Roland dreams of the tower, of his goddamn tower. He was beginning to love these two, but he knew he would kill either of them if it meant getting closer to his precious tower. Eddie eventually slept beside Susanna, the third Roland had drawn to make a new three. But Roland sat awake and listened to the voices in the night while the wind dried the tears on his cheeks. Damnation, salvation, the tower. He would come to the dark tower, and there he would sing their names. There he would sing their names. There he would sing all of their names. The sun stained the east a dusky rose, and at last Roland, no longer the last gunslinger, but one of the last three, slept and dreamed his angry dreams, through which there ran only that one soothing blue thread. There I will sing all their names.